Welcome, I'm Martin Ragcon, host of the Ryerson Democracy Forum. Today, we're just 18 weeks away from voting day on June the 2nd, which is why three opposition party leaders are here to talk about the coming campaign in Ontario. I hope we're kind of kicking off the pre-election phase today right here. Before we get started, a reminder that Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. That's a treaty of the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee, and we acknowledge this land today. Before I tell you about our guests, just a quick word about me. I write a political column for the Toronto Star, Canada's biggest and best daily newspaper. But in my other life, I'm a visiting practitioner in the Faculty of Arts, which is sponsoring today's event. Now, we launched the Democracy Forum just about 4 years ago, a little bit ahead of the last provincial election, when we had all four major party leaders on stage together pre-COVID, talking about democratic engagement, and including the Premier of the day, Kathleen Wynne. Now, we've had her successor, Doug Ford, on the Democracy Forum just over a year ago, and now it's the turn of the opposition leaders to have their say, starting with the Ontario NDP leader, Andrea Horvath, in the first segment, and next up after that will be the Liberal leader, Stephen Del Duca, and finally, Green Party leader, Mike Schreiner. And we'll be opening it up to the audience for questions using the chat function. Don't forget to include your name, and I will give you a shout out when I read out your question. Just a reminder, this is not a news conference, it's a democracy forum. So I'm not here to harangue our guests. I'm here to hold them to account. And it's really up to you to ask, I think, thoughtful questions and hope that their answers will be helpful. No pressure. So let me tell you a little bit about our first guest, the leader of the official opposition in the legislature. Andrea Horvath won the leadership of the New Democratic Party in 2009 and is also MPP for Hamilton Centre. She was a city councillor before that and a community organizer. She got her BA in Labour Studies from McMaster University. Ms. Horvath, welcome back to the Democracy Forum.
Thank you for the invitation, Martin. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Well, we've had a lot of New Democrats at the Democracy Forum since you were here. We've had the NDP Black Caucus, we had Butila Karpoche, we had the deputy leader, Sarah Singh, we had the federal leader, Jagmeet Singh. So it's one New Democrat after another and holding up the flag, and now it's over to you. So I'm going to kick it off with a couple of quick questions to get us rolling as the audience questions come in. The title of today's event is Who Can Defeat Doug Ford? And by the way, some people have asked, why did we call it that? Are we somehow ganging up against him? And for the record, we did invite him to come back, but his office took a rain check, and that's their right. And so by default, the obvious question, because he's sitting this out, is who among you can unseat him? So Ms. Horvath, you obviously believe the NDP can do the job. So my question is how? Because you had an amazing opportunity last time, and you didn't. He defeated you. The stars were all in alignment. So this will be your fourth time trying to win. How do you make it happen this time? How can you be the dragon slayer that a lot of voters are looking for? How do you persuade them that you can do it?
Well, thanks for that question, Martin. And it's an extremely important one. I want to just start by saying the big piece is that we're going to build on what we were able to achieve last time around with the help of Ontarians who were looking for some change in Ontario. But what they got is a government that really hasn't cleaned up the messes that were left by the Liberals. Look, the electorate, if you will, they ran the Liberals out on the rails. That's certainly what happened. But we've ended up with a government that's not taking care of the basics that people expect a government to take care of. There are two things I think that are important. One is that we certainly do have the kinds of policies and the kinds of plans that will clean up those messes and fix things for Ontarians. But when you look at the math, there's also a great opportunity there as well, a great advantage. We go in with 40 MPPs, where the Liberals, I think, have 7, 2 of whom are not going to run again. But we've also come either first or second in 100 ridings last time around, where I think the Liberals achieved maybe around a third of that, a little bit more than a third. So when it comes to policies and when it comes to the numbers, we are very well situated to form government. And I look forward to that, because I got to say, being opposition and criticizing all the time is my job, and I'm passionate about that, and I love to be the voice of people. But I also want to get to making the changes that people need to see in the future, and that's switching from the criticism to the action is something I look forward to.
Yeah, and policy is really important to me as a political columnist, and the horse race, or I call it horse racism, it can get out of hand with in the media. But I do think that's an important point, and here's why. I mean, the latest polling analysis this week, updated this week on the 338 Canada website, now predicts that Doug Ford will in fact still come first, but that he will fall short of a majority government. So tell us what you would do in a minority legislature. Over the years, I understand you kind of duck that question. You'd always say, Martin, I'm running to be premier. That's a hypothetical. But then last year, you and I talked and you changed your mind and you made a bit of a splash. And in case people missed it, let's share with the audience what you told me. So the question is, would you support Doug Ford's Tories in a legislative minority, or would you vote non-confidence in the government?
Well, you have said very clearly, and this is where I stand on the Doug Ford question, we're just too far apart. Fundamentally, my values, my beliefs, my policy objectives are completely the opposite of Doug Ford. So I don't see any scenario where I would support a Doug Ford government. I think that people, though, have a lot of time between now and the election to make that determination. And polls will jump all over the place. Folks are still, I think, focused on the pandemic. And as we get closer and closer to the election campaign, their focus will change. And so my job is to show them that we don't have to go back to 15 years of disappointments with the Liberals, nor do we have to stay with a government that hasn't made the improvements that people were hoping for. There is a choice there for a government that gets them and that knows that it's time to actually fix the messes and get back to dealing with the basics that people should be able to expect from their government, not the moon and the stars, but some of the fundamentals around our healthcare system, our education system, and making sure we're battling climate change. There's a lot of pieces that people want to see some action on, and certainly that's going to be my focus.
Okay, and you made a good point earlier that you came out with 40 seats in the last election. That gives you a huge head start over the Liberals, but the polls do show that the NDP and the Liberals are more or less neck and neck. I've looked at them closely. I'm not going to regurgitate them here, but it's fair to say you guys keep trading places, second and third place with the Tories almost always in front. Sometimes the Liberals number one, sometimes you number one, but basically it's a fight for second place. So if you finish ahead of the Liberals, you're counting on Stephen Del Duca to support you in a minority government. But just to be clear, if Stephen Del Duca comes in ahead of you, hypothetically, as he used to say to me, can he count on you to support a Liberal government?
Well, what I've said to you and to others, and this is where I'm at, I think that if Stephen Del Duca is prepared to support the things that we want to see happen to fix what's wrong in Ontario, then I would welcome that and I would be prepared to have that conversation. But I think the voters have a huge decision to make. And just, not too long ago, last summer, I was in Brampton. There was the renaming of a park. It was became Emancipation Park. And I had a number of former Liberal voters approach me and say, we went with you last time, we're sticking with you. I would invite all progressive voters to really look at what the numbers say, which as the NDP is the party with the steam and the team to get her done this time around. And I'm looking forward to that opportunity.
Okay, I'm looking at the questions coming in from Rhiannon and John is compiling them for me. And a lot of people are asking what I just asked, which is, for example, are you prepared to collaborate to defeat Doug Ford? So, I mean, I think we all know that is very top of mind for voters. So folks, leave that with me. I will try to pin them down on that one. But let's try to turn to some other questions. And here's one that I'm going to just quickly go with. A bit of a softball, not a trick question. But it does occur to me that in the previous election, you and your team talked an awful lot about what you called hallway medicine and a lack of capacity in the healthcare system. And not everybody paid close enough attention, probably including me. Then COVID came along. I don't want to talk too much about COVID today, although if that's on people's minds, absolutely. But clearly, one of the problems with COVID isn't just the virus, but our hospital capacity. Tell us how that how that has played out and what you can do to fix that going forward.
It's a really important question because what we've seen is our healthcare system become overwhelmed with this virus. And it's overwhelmed because it was really on its knees before the virus hit. The former government was freezing hospital budgets, was cutting in healthcare and hospitals, didn't really didn't invest in long-term care and create a long-term care system that we could have confidence in. And so as a result, as COVID has ripped through our healthcare system or our province, our healthcare system has not been able to cope. And so there are lots of things that we need to do to shore up our healthcare system. And absolutely, we were talking about that last time around because we saw what was happening in healthcare and we listened not only to frontline healthcare workers, nurses, and others, but we listened to the experience of patients who were waiting hours and hours and hours in pain and with complete lack of dignity, literally in the hallways of hospitals all across the province. So we can do much better than that. And this is one of the basics I was talking about before. A healthcare system that people can rely on, no matter where they live in Ontario or when they need that healthcare system, is one of the basics, and we need to get that right.
So you've come out you've already come forward with a platform on the environment and carbon, global warming, on housing. You've talked before in previous platforms about pharmacare. Are you going to be able to talk? Are you and will I be able to get people focused on the issues in this campaign if really top of mind is the Premier, Doug Ford, a controversial and polarizing figure?
I think Ontarians are concerned about where we go from here. That's certainly what I hear. I hear people, talk about the fact that they want to get off this roller coaster ride. They want to, make sure that the things that they are concerned about get fixed. That we fix things for them, things that they care about and things that are important to them need to be fixed. And as I said before, there was a lot of dissatisfaction, I guess is the better word, with the former government because they left a number of these things undone, whether it's a crumbling hospital and long-term care system, schools that literally had over $15 billion in backlog repairs, which then, of course, came home to roost during COVID as well. These are some of the basics and fundamentals. And I think that yes, there's going to be a dialogue, a discussion about who, as a personality, leads the province. But my sense, what I'm hearing from people, is they really just want to get off the roller coaster ride and have a government that hears them, listens to them, makes plans, and then takes action.
Okay. Reminder to folks, send in your questions, use the chat function, send us your name as well so I can give you a shout out. Question from Anonymous for all three party leaders, but we'll start with you on this what are your top three priorities? I mentioned two or three of the policies you've come up with already, but what are your top three? Just very quickly, chapter headings.
Well, certainly our healthcare system needs to be rebuilt in a way that meets people's needs. Mental health is a part of that, by the way. Our education system, both the education system at the elementary level and secondary level, but also post-secondary. Young people are leaving their post-secondary studies with debts the size of mortgages and really concerned about the affordability of everyday life for young people and some hope for the future for young people, but also housing. Housing's a major problem. And the affordability of everyday life is a big factor when it comes to the cost of housing, as well as the cost of childcare. So I think those are kind of up there in terms of people's concerns and certainly priorities for me. The basics.
You mentioned childcare. Here's a question from a 15-year-old who is named Xavier. I love politics and I hope to be premier or prime minister one day. My question is about childcare. What are the parties going to do about childcare, which Ford has not yet signed? Referring to a bilateral federal provincial deal, not yet signed. My own newspaper has said they're very close, but what are you going to do about it?
Well, first of all, Xavier, you chase those dreams. Anybody can do that. Anybody can run for office and make a difference. And so I just want to encourage you on your path to do exactly that. It's shameful that our government has not yet signed a deal. We're the only province that has the only territory or province that has not signed a deal when it comes to childcare. And, this was an ongoing discussion since last June. So there's no excuse for this deal not to have been signed, except that obviously it wasn't a priority for Doug Ford and his government, but it is a priority for families. We are paying the highest childcare costs in the entire country here in Ontario. There are literally provinces that have gotten rebates when the calendar changed to 2022. In some provinces, families were getting rebates for the fees that they were paying since June of last year. This just needs to be a priority. We've been calling for $10 a day childcare for years now, and it's great that it's finally within sight. The problem is it has to be prioritized. A deal has to be struck because families need and deserve the relief, and women need to get back into the workforce to help their families build a life here.
Okay, here's a question we see a lot of. It's from Tim Larry. And it kind of dovetails in a way with the policy questions, the nuts and bolts we've been trying to talk about, you and me together just now. Ms. Horvath, you've been at the helm of the provincial NDP for a number of years and 4 elections. What do you feel has been the missing ingredient that has been preventing you and your party from truly resonating with the people of Ontario? More importantly, what will you do to improve this, thereby making you and the NDP the party of choice? Sounds like a sympathetic question. To me, the question, what I'm hearing from that question is, why aren't you able to persuade people of the policies that you so clearly believe in?
Well, I really want to acknowledge that we have done a great deal of work listening to Ontarians. Look, I have to say, I am the leader right now in this race that knows Ontario the best. I have a great deal of experience, and so I don't see my time at the helm as something that's a problem. Quite the opposite. I'm very, very proud of the experience that I've been able to gain. Why? Because I've listened to people from all across this province, in every community, talked to them, heard about what their concerns are, what their hopes are, what they want to see fixed when it comes to their government. And that's experience that I take with me as a leader and into this campaign with a team of 40 MPPs that are amazing. That we, for the first time ever, we formed the official opposition in Ontario, and we represent every type of community in every part of the province. You mentioned, Martin, our Black Caucus. We have such diversity in our caucus, and that's what it takes. It takes having people around the table that really get what Ontario is all about and who Ontario is. And certainly that's what we bring with us into this campaign.
I'm being told by Rihanna that we're getting a lot of questions about the coalition and about the campaign, some of which I've already asked, and some of which I will circle back to in our closing moments. Here's a question from Morgan Dandy Hannah, but a reminder, send in your questions and let us know what else you're worried about: COVID, mental health, race relations. We are all ears, the environment, housing, etc. From Morgan Dandy Hannah in Guelph, what plan does the NDP have to grow the Greenbelt, protect agricultural land, to feed us and increase the housing stock, especially deeply affordable housing?
Well, thank you so much, Morgan, for that extremely important question. I first and foremost want to say that we've got a plan for the environment that is one that we're very, very proud of. Certainly, the growing of the Greenbelt is part of that plan, and we're committed, to those kinds of initiatives. Absolutely. In terms of the housing crisis, our housing platform plank, which Martin already referenced in the opening comments, is pretty substantial. And not only does it talk about how do we cool off the current market, but it also talks about exactly what you're talking about: a deeply affordable housing, getting back to building a true affordable housing, but also supportive housing, so that people who need to have that affordability and have other challenges that they have that prevents them from maintaining their housing can be supported, so that housing is maintained. We want to see more missing middle housing built, and have policies to ensure that happens, to help people get into the housing market. Absolutely a huge priority. And as we see, people are in a situation now where they can't even have any hope that they'll be able to, never mind buy a house in their own neighborhood, but become a homeowner in pretty much any part of this province. Becoming that homeowner is becoming much, much more difficult for people, and they're losing hope. And we can certainly change that up.
Okay. One more before we circle back to the topic that is clearly on people's minds, which is coalitions and the premier. This one comes from, forgive me if I missed the pronunciation, Joselle Angelica Gerard. Education is one of the province's largest jurisdictional responsibilities. How will you and your party ensure that post-secondary students have the government actions they need in increasing the guarantee of employability in Ontario and support for paying off their student loans?
Well, Giselle, thank you so much for that question. I've watched for years now as young people have been attending post-secondary, in some cases, starting at university, for example, and then switching over to college because they couldn't get anywhere with the degree that they had earned. What we want to do, though, is make sure that these opportunities exist for more young people in terms of the cost of education. And so we are very, very concerned that young people are leaving their post-secondary studies with debts the size of mortgages. We have the highest tuition fees in the entire country, and we're committed to not only relieving the accumulated debt that students have now have to deal with, but also ensuring that tuition becomes more affordable because it's a deterrent for young people to make the decision to go to post-secondary because their family perhaps is not in a financial situation to help with that, and they see the future of with massive debt hanging over their head, and it's something that really prevents them from making that decision. And so there are lots of things that can be done, starting with tackling the tuition fees and making sure that people have more access through other programs and reducing the debt burden.
Here's one for you from me on behalf of my two kids, both of whom are in first-year university. Where do you stand, the NDP, on the question of whether universities and colleges should have closed this month and whether they should stay closed next month? Should they be online? Should there be a mix? Should people be in class or online?
I know that young people have struggled a great deal throughout this pandemic, and it has been tough. And I feel so much for your girls, Martin, because it was their first year and they've had quite a rocky road. I have a niece who's also struggling through these kinds of situations, and it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking that they didn't get the frosh week. They didn't get the kind of introduction to post-secondary that many of us were able to experience. I want to say that the colleges and universities, I think, have done a laudable job trying to strike a balance, trying to listen to the science, pay attention to the advice of the medical officers of health in their own regions, as well as the chief medical officer. And that's really got to be the priority. I mean, we really do need to wrestle this virus to the ground. We really do need to be thoughtful about the spread of COVID-19. And I think that the decisions that have been made by universities and colleges have been ones that might not be optimal in terms of the educational experience, but we need to get through COVID-19 and then provide the opportunity for young people to get back onto campus and enjoy campus life.
Okay. Here's a couple of questions that are cropping up. One from Nick DeSuma. I'm going to read two because they're kind of related and they speak for a lot of the questions we're getting. From Nick DeSuma, the Ontario vote projections from 338 Canada, that's the website I referred to earlier, shows the PCs with 35% of the vote, 59 seats. That's just shy of a majority. Liberals and NDP with 27% each. It's clear that most Ontarians, he writes, have a center-left agenda, but our voting system won't allow for this. In a time of a never-ending pandemic, cuts to healthcare and education, et cetera, isn't it time we put party lines aside between the NDP and Liberals in order to defeat Doug Ford? Let me just quickly read one other while you're pondering that one, which is related. Hang on. Also on the question of working together, but I've lost it. So that we'll let Nick speak for the other ones. There seems to be a feeling that why can't the Liberals and you Democrats somehow cooperate? It's inchoate, it's not articulated precisely. Any thought about that? What do you say when people ask you that?
There's no doubt that people are frustrated with where things are at with Doug Ford, and I understand that. What I can say, though, as I mentioned before, is that with 40 MPPs going into this election campaign, I think people you can reliably look at the NDP as a party and myself as a leader with experience and knowledge of this province that's unmatched, as a party that can actually form government and take on Doug Ford. That's what this topic is about today that we're discussing. I also think that it's important to acknowledge that, it's a ways before the election campaign actually hits. And so the polls will be all over the place, as I already had said. But it's really, I think, an important time for Ontario. I think we really need to look at, do we go back to, to a government that sells off Hydro One, that, has scandals coming out its ears, like the gas plant scandal, that cut hospital funding and left us with the mess that we have? Or do we actually really look at the party that's got the policies, that's got the plans, that's got the experience, that's got the team and the steam, as I said, to really make a difference for our province? People want things to be fixed. They want things to be fixed. They want to get out of this mess that we're in, and I believe that we have the best opportunity to do that for Ontarians.
Okay, I found the question that I had lost. I'm just going to read it out from Sandy Crawley. It will have a familiar echo. Sandy writes, can there be cooperation between opposition parties? I know both the Liberals and NDP have signaled a willingness to form a coalition government. I'm not sure that's exactly right. But if the seat count makes that feasible, but what about some cooperation during the election and including the Green Party?
Well, as I said, we certainly have the largest number of seats as the official opposition. I think the Liberals have 7 or 5. And if Stephen Del Duca wants to get behind our 40 MPPs and more, we'll welcome him. But at the end of the day, what we don't want is to go back to the kind of Liberal government that we had, that people walked away from last time around. We don't need that again. We want a government, or we need a government. People tell me they want a government that's actually going to listen to what they have to say and fix the problems that they're facing. And coming out of COVID-19, those problems are significant. And we will see what the electorate decides come June 2nd, 18 months or 18 weeks away, rather. We will wait for that decision to be made. But certainly, I can tell you straight up that should Doug Ford form a minority government, I will not be able to support that government, because we are just we're on the extremes, if you will, of the political spectrum. And I just don't have a lot of respect for what he has done here in Ontario. And I can't see myself supporting that kind of government.
Okay, I want to get in this question from Sam Ristoul, and then I'm going to hop back to this larger question that's on everyone's mind. Sam asks, will the Ontario NDP bring back the subcommittees under the Ontario anti-racism strategy that were slashed after the Ford government came in? And will you bring back the mandatory anti-racism conference?
First of all, absolutely. I was shocked and disappointed when we saw what the government of the day, Doug Ford, did to basically tear down the anti-racism directorate. I mean, leaving $1,000 as a budget line for proactive anti-racism work is shameful. I have to say, we fought for a long time with community to get the Liberals to institute this directorate in the first place. And so I want to thank all of those community leaders who worked with us to push the Liberals to do the right thing in that regard. There is just no way that we would do anything but rebuild it and make sure that not only are we addressing the pieces that you talked about in your question, but we have to look at what's happening out there, the growing hate, the Islamophobia, the anti-Semitism, the anti-Black racism, the anti-trans folks, like the people that are transphobic and that are homophobic. There is the anti-indigeneity that's out there. All of these things are becoming worse, not better. The divisions are becoming deeper, and we have an obligation not only to talk about these things and to reflect on them, but to take action. And the Anti-Racism Directorate had an opportunity to do some of that proactive work, and we will absolutely be making sure, should we form government in a couple months' time, that we will not only bring it back, but we will make sure that it's responsive and proactive to what's happening across government, right? Across all government. So whether we're talking about the education system, the healthcare system, we saw what's happened with COVID. and the kind of inequities in terms of our COVID response. I just was reading the paper recently, a couple minutes ago, before this this session in Hamilton, looking at where the vaccines are least in terms of our schools, where the schools that have over 30% cases are situated, and they're in the lower income racialized communities. We've seen what happened with the hotspot communities in places like Brampton and Scarborough in terms of access to vaccines, access to testing. There's a lot of work that needs to be done across all of our systems and all of our ministries, the justice system, as I said, the education system, a lot of work to be done. And we're certainly looking forward to having that opportunity through the Anti-Racism Directorate and other venues as well.
Okay, I want to try to connect the dots here because I promised I would circle back to this question that is clearly on people's minds. So one last question from me about, it's actually twofold. Briefly, I want to just ask, and some of the polls show that you're a popular leader. A lot of polls show that Doug Ford is unpopular, but his party is still number one. It may or may not get a majority. How is it possible, in your view, that Doug Ford's progressive conservatives are almost always leading the polls?
I'm not a pollster, Martin, and I don't know which polls are, the ones that you're specifically referring to. Well, again, I don't know what those questions are. I don't know what the tabs are in terms of the backgrounds of those polls. But what I can say to you is this: I think Ontarians know that this government has not been operating in their interests. If it comes to being a buddy of Doug Ford's, then you got everything you needed. The rest of us are the ones that have to pay for that. Whether it's the cuts to things like our public health system, and then we get hit by a pandemic. Whether it's other big cuts and bad decisions, bad choices that Doug Ford has made, Ontarians realize that we can do better. We need to have a government that's prepared to fix the problems that they're facing, particularly coming out of COVID-19. So I think there's a lot of conversation and a lot of thoughtfulness that's going to go into this campaign. And I think the polls of today are something that are going to be changing, I would imagine, as they always do between now and the election. People are still pretty seized with what's happening to us in the Omicron wave. And I understand that. I think that as we get closer, though, people will be putting their minds to what comes next here in Ontario. And
fair
certainly
point.
that's
fair point. And polls are just a snapshot. And I'm not a believer in polls necessarily being predictive.
You're certainly fooling me because you keep
but it's unusual to have the governing party in front so close to an election. Rarely happens in Ontario. Here's a question, though, that we've heard over and over again today. A lot of people seem to want more cooperation between the parties. I hear that a lot. You've been attacking today and in your ad campaigns the Liberals as corrupt and incompetent. So could you actually work with them? And what would it look like? Would there be some kind of accord like 1985, or why not a coalition with cabinet seats for either party in a coalition government?
Well, again, these are things that I think the electorate has to decide on before we get out ahead of ourselves. As I said, we have some pretty solid plans that would help address the fundamentals, the basics, the things that people really want to see some action on, really want to see fixed. If the Green Party and or the Liberal Party are prepared to help us achieve those things for Ontarians, then I'm all ears. But I think we need to give the electorate the respect of having their say first and look forward to what that say is going to be.
I might have been slightly distracted, juggling questions, listening to you and everything else. But did I hear you say or not that you could support a Stephen Del Duca government if he comes out ahead fair and square?
Well, what I said is that we're going to wait to have the electorate give their opinion. And then if it's a matter of working on the things that we believe that Ontarians want to see fixed and work on those solutions, then the ones that we've identified particularly, then absolutely I'm prepared to do that work and hope that he is.
Fair enough. That's all the time we have. Ms. Horvath, thanks again for joining us. Stay safe travels. See you on the campaign trail. And we're now going to have, it's time now for our second segment with the leader of Ontario's Liberals, Ms. Horvath, make sure to unmute your microphone so there's no hot mic, and thanks again for coming with us. Let me tell you a little bit about Stephen Del Duca. He won the party leadership, the Liberal Party leadership in early 2020, just as COVID-19 was taking root in Ontario. He was Minister of Transportation in the previous Liberal government and also Economic Development and the MPP for Vaughan. Before politics, he worked for the Carpenters Union. He's a graduate of Osgoode Hall Law School, and he studied political science at the U of T and Carleton University. Mr. Del Duca, welcome. Oh, make sure you unmute, sir. There you are.
There you go. Are we unmuted now?
Yes. I hope you weren't saying anything.
Almost 2 years.
I hope your microphone wasn't when your microphone was not live. I hope you were not saying unkind things. Sorry.
I would never do that.
Okay. So a quick question, by the way. What is it like to win a party leadership and then be almost locked down right away and stuck on Zoom for almost 2 years?
Well, you know, as I think you were saying just a second ago, I won the convention Saturday, March 7th. We had less than a full week, really, for me to get back on the road. I did go back on the road. I went to Windsor, Ottawa, and Thunder Bay those first 3 days of that following week before we realized we were heading into a lockdown. Look, it's been tough. There's no doubt about the fact that whatever planning I had thought about, or I had come up with, or the team had come up with heading into that convention was obviously thrown, I guess, out, because really everything was changing around us. But I just have to say, within our own party, not unlike the people of Ontario, we transitioned really quickly and really well. And, you know, we've managed to get a lot done over the past couple of years, though most of our work has become virtual, like it is for most Ontarians. And I just want to say, as tough as that transition might have been, and as shocking as it was for me and for Ontario Liberals, that pales in comparison, of course, to what so many people in this province have had to endure over the past couple of years.
Fair enough. Okay, let's get right to it.
Sure.
A reminder to our audience, please send in your questions using the chat function, and include your name, and we'll give you a shout out. So, Mr. Del Duca, you probably just heard Ms. Horvath tell us that she's the one to defeat Doug Ford, that she has a huge head start in terms of her seat count, which is true. But she lost to him in the last election, and you lost your seat to Mr. Ford in the last election to his party. So how do you persuade people that you are the dragon slayer this time and not Ms. Horvath? Because clearly, as we're seeing today, that is on the minds of a lot of voters.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I think it's on the minds of a lot of voters because they realize that through the last couple of years in particular, but frankly, even before the pandemic struck, I think there's an awareness that Doug Ford was taking Ontario off track. And I have a ton of respect for every woman and man who puts their name forward to run for elected office. And of course, I tried hard, really, really hard during this pandemic to work across party lines. That won't stop. But, you know, I am really thrilled to be leading a party that has such an exceptionally strong and talented roster of candidates. We are building a plan that will be compelling and relatable for the people of this province. And above all else, given my own past experience and given the experience of the women and men who've stepped forward to run with me, I know that we can start the job on day one. And I think in life, experience is critically important. We have no time left to waste after this election when it comes to rebuilding and recovering. And I feel very optimistic that people of Ontario will understand we got the plan, we got the team, and working together, we'll actually deliver progress for them.
How do you persuade people not only that you can defeat Doug Ford, but that you're different than the government that was defeated by Doug Ford just 4 years ago and of which you were a part? I mean, that is something that Ms. Horvath is obviously stressing. What's your response to that?
Well, look, I think from the very day that I became leader of my party, Saturday, March 7th, 2020, I have always acknowledged that during my time in the past Liberal government, I think we accomplished a great deal. I don't think we were a perfect government. I also know that the people of Ontario had their chance to render their judgment back in June 2018. Then we ended up with Doug Ford, who, again, as I said a second ago, has been taking Ontario consistently off track. I don't live my life in the past, and I don't think most Ontarians want leaders who are always looking in the rearview mirror. They want to know about what's next. They want to know who's got that plan to move the province forward, in particular in that post-COVID world that we all want to get to. When they think about a resilient and exceptional healthcare system or education system or an economy that works for all of us, people want to know who is the leader who's got the plan? Who's the team that's got the plan and the energy and the experience to actually deliver? And again, I'm convinced, given the work that we're doing, people will see that in the Ontario Liberal Party.
Okay, well then let's look forward and follow up on the question that I asked Ms. Horvath. So last year, after she went on record as saying that she could not support a Doug Ford government, I asked you the same question. So let's put it out there again for the public. If you have the balance of power, would you support Doug Ford's Tories for another term in government?
Well, let me just say, as I touched upon just a second ago, throughout this pandemic, I have worked so hard to try to build relationships, work across party lines, to emphasize the need for collaboration in a nonpartisan way. You'll know, Martin, that I helped to organize a summit back on August of last year on the vaccine certificate. We convened with a series of leaders in healthcare, education, the municipal sector, and in other sectors to have a conversation. Other parties, the Greens and the NDP, were there. We did the same thing just a few weeks ago in healthcare. Again, the Greens and the NDP were there. I've talked about the need for us to reform how we do our elections in this province, because frankly, I think especially during COVID, the people of Ontario are fed up with politicians who only want a system that suits themselves as opposed to working for the people of Ontario. This is my way.
Let's park for a second. Sure. Electoral reform and some of the other issues. What would you do if Doug Ford comes out on top but loses his majority?
Well, this is my way, and it's a great question, and I'm glad you've asked it. This is my way of getting to that answer. I think what people want to see in this province is leaders who are confident enough to be able to work across party lines. Having said that, Doug Ford has demonstrated consistently during COVID, even before COVID, but in particular during COVID, he's not the right person for the job. He's not being the right person for the job during our toughest times. He doesn't have what it takes, not the capacity, the curiosity, the interest, or the skill set to get us through to the recovery and rebuild this province the way that we need to. So given that, though I'm prepared to work with virtually any person in this province to give us real progress, I don't believe that I'll be able to support Doug Ford.
So I assume you're counting on Ms. Horvath to support a Liberal government if you come out ahead. So what if she beats you out fair and square? You've got a long way to catch up to her, 7 versus 40 seats. Would you support an NDP government with Andrea Horvath as premier?
Can I just make one really quick comment about this notion 7 versus 40
Sure.
or 7 versus 40 versus 1 versus whatever Doug's at right now? I think people need to understand you start election campaigns off, frankly, across the board in an equal way. Before the people of this province have had a chance to speak, to actually let us know, all of us, Martin, you know, and me know, and the rest of us know exactly how they're feeling about the future. I think that's a little bit of a kind of in a way, disrespectful way to look at how the electorate deals with election campaigns. Having said that, I'm not going to prejudge the outcome. What I'm focused on, keep my head down, working relentlessly hard, building that team, building that plan. I'll be prepared to work with anyone who shares my passion for delivering real progress. I've just pointed out a second ago, I just don't think Doug Ford is the person who's got that capacity given what we've seen. But as I've done throughout this pandemic, I'd be delighted to work with anyone who wants to deliver the outcomes that Ontarians desperately need right now.
So that sounds like you could and would work with Andrea Horvath's NDP, including if she comes out ahead and if that's what it takes to dislodge a Doug Ford government. What if Doug Ford resigns? Would you support a Tory government, a progressive conservative government with somebody who replaces Doug Ford if he loses his majority, for example?
Yeah, listen, I think it's so important for us to have that respect of the electorate, to give them their chance to have their say. I think throughout the course of the campaign, we're going to see, I hope, a very healthy clash of ideas about who's got the best plan to take the province forward. I think political campaigns, election campaigns, just like COVID, I think they reveal a lot about the people who are seeking office. So I want the people of this province to have their say, cast their ballots. I've already pointed out that I don't think Doug's the right person for the job. I just can't see him growing into the job beyond what he's already managed to do. And so I want the people to have their say, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Just one last kick at the can here. How would it work? Do you see an accord like we had in 1985 with the NDP supporting the Liberals? Do you see that? Would you consider a coalition with cabinet seats for both parties?
So, we're kind of into the realm, and I understand why, of sort of looking at the machinations of the moving parts and the calculus that goes into all of this. let me just say, and again, I say this respectfully, right now, people across this province, they want to know that their publicly funded education system, our schools where our kids go, are actually resilient in providing proper learning. Same thing in healthcare, same thing with an economy that they want to work for all of us, not just the well-connected few. I think sometimes politicians lose the plot when we end up so focused on how we're going to divvy up the power rather than how we're going to deliver real progress. So I know these questions might confront us June 3rd and beyond. I want to have an open and transparent discussion with whoever might want to have that discussion about how we deliver progress. But in the meantime, I am focused relentlessly on building a team and putting together a plan that's actually going to take Ontario where I want it to go on behalf of the people who call this province home.
Okay, here's a question from John Glickman. You wanted to talk about policy. Here's your chance. How are you going to, oops, that just pushed back on my WhatsApp feed here. Here we go. How will you fund the needed healthcare improvements and other priorities within a reasonable financial framework? And if I can just add, bearing in mind that healthcare did not have the full capacity that we discovered that we were short of during COVID.
Yeah, look, it's such an important question because of what we've seen during COVID. I think when it comes to healthcare and education, which I believe are the sort of twin foundational pillars that should be the primary responsibilities of a premier and his or her focus at all times, I think we've been suffering in Ontario for too long, what I like to call an ambition gap, where despite the billions that we invest in both of those systems, when we need them to be at their strongest, they're not as resilient as they should be. So I already know, we all know that the healthcare budget consumes so much of what we invest here in the province of Ontario annually. I think that number needs to go up. But I also watched closely during the most recent federal campaign when all of the party leaders, including, of course, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, talked about the need to invest more in healthcare across this country. And of course, we know that Ontario represents roughly 40% of Canada's population. I think it is important, as premiers have done in the past, to varying degrees of success, to have the kind of conversation with Ottawa where we talk about how are we financing our federation? What are the most important things to us? And healthcare is something Canadians hold so dear, we have to get it right. So I believe that the costs, the investments need to rise. I believe Ottawa needs to be at the table for that conversation. And again, between healthcare and education, those are the twin pillars that I would be spending most of my time on, not all, but most of my time on, because they both need to be exceptional and they both need to be resilient.
Okay, let's get a housing question here. This is for you. Given skyrocketing housing prices, how will your housing platform reduce housing prices, making them more affordable for the middle class? And how is your housing platform going to be more advantageous in these respects than that of the NDP? I'm not sure we've seen much detail from you. You promised about a year ago an extensive platform consultation. Yep. Where are you on housing?
So first of all, let me just say we are engaged in a very extensive, what I consider to be the most open and transparent and collaborative platform consultation in our party's history. And I say that as someone who did co-chair platform all the way back in 2014. We've had hundreds of thousands of people providing input through a process, again, most of it done virtually. We started late last year to release smaller segments of the platform. There are more that are going to be coming soon, including issues touching upon issues like housing. When my wife and I think about our daughters, one of whom is 15, the other is 10, we shudder to think about where they're going to be able to afford to live, whether it's buying, whether it's renting, whatever the case is, because we know not just in the GTA, but frankly, right across large chunks of Ontario, housing, shelter affordability, if I can put it that way, is slowly but surely, or in some cases not so slowly, falling out of reach for far too many people. So I think there are some really important ideas that have already come forward around exclusionary zoning and different policies that we see in place. That's something that we've been talking about. We know there's a serious supply concern that we have, and supply is definitely linked to the affordability question. But I also think that if we're only going to come forward with the same old ideas, that, as we kind of nibble around the margins, we're not really going to get to the heart of the matter. So again, we saw federal politicians talking about housing last summer and fall during their campaign. We know the province plays such a significant role. We know our municipal friends and partners also play a role. I will say, I think it's time for us to be bold here. I think it's time for us to have some conversations that might be, well, not so comfortable with industry partners, with municipal partners, our federal friends. I think if we're really going to shake this up and deliver the more than million new homes that we need over the next decade, really just to break even, we're going to have to break a few eggshells in order to make that omelet, as the saying goes. So stay tuned for more details, but I don't want to just nibble around the edges. I want us to really go right to the heart of the affordability issue for all forms of housing. And I think there's a way to do it.
Okay, I'm going to I sometimes do this in our democracy forum. I kind of throw two questions together. They're not trick questions, but they actually do riff off of what you've just been talking about reimagining things. So one from Jaden Ramnath. Mr. Del Duca, how do you convince voters that you will build a different government? The party has 15 years, a record of 15 years of government from 2003 to 2018. Although those 15 years got a lot of achievements done, there were some bumps, and which takes me to the second question from Nabil Jalil. When the issue of healthcare comes, the discourse is usually dominated by larger investments in infrastructure and a focus on healthcare professionals. Primary care seems to have been neglected in the last few years. So what is your government's policy on improving healthcare from the ground up? I threw those two at you because you talked about the fact it's true. Yeah. There is a lot of money spent on healthcare. It's a huge predominant part of the budget, but it doesn't deliver when we need it to. And money isn't always the answer. So how do you rebuild things?
Well, so I'll try to tackle both of those if I can, Martin. And so the first question relating to how would I be different? Look, when you go through the experience that I went through in 2018, when you lose your own seat, when there are other challenges that you face in your personal life, it does definitely change you. You know, I had the honor of serving for 6 years as an MPP prior to that point, 4 years holding 2 different cabinet portfolios. And there was a lot that we were trying to get done. There's no doubt about that. And the pace at which we were moving, the responsibilities that each of us had, me included, had us working as hard as we possibly can. When that suddenly comes to a stop and you lose in your own community, it gives you that time to reflect upon, yes, what you did well, but more importantly, why you ended up in the spot that you ended up in. And so, you know, with all of that work, with that self-reflection.
What was your answer? Why did you end up in that spot?
Well, I think, and I've said this again in the past as well, I think despite our best efforts, despite the progress we made, advancing Indigenous reconciliation, advancing, better pensions for not just Ontarians, but Canadians, a ton of work that we did around sexual harassment and so much. I mean, there's a long list of things that we did manage to accomplish over those past 4 years. I think by the end of it, Ontarians felt that more often than not, we weren't listening. We weren't listening in particular to the cost of living pressures, the affordability pressures they were facing. And I think that's a really important lesson. So as I said, as I reflected on what happened to me locally in my home community of Vaughan, and what I saw taking place, I think it's made me a stronger leader and a person who is humble enough to know, well, what I know, but also humble enough to know what I don't know, and self-aware enough to know that you've got to draw upon those experiences, ask the right questions, be curious, demonstrate that you have the capacity to lead. And when you look at some of the ideas that I've already put forward, earlier we touched upon a little bit of what I've said around electoral reform, improving and strengthening our democracy with my call for a ranked ballot system, my determination to not only kickstart the universal basic income pilot again, but to also launch a pilot around the possibilities of a 4-day work week here in Ontario. I hope this gives a sense to people that I am prepared to do things a little bit differently. Look at our candidate roster. We've had to rebuild from a relatively small caucus, it's true, but way more than 50% of our candidates are female. About 50% of our candidates are people of color. We have more young candidates amongst those of us, those who've stepped forward. So this is a demonstration, I think, of how I, as a leader, am working really hard to be collaborative, to be responsive, and to build in a different way. And then on the healthcare question, because I forgot for a second, there was a second question there. Look, I think there's so many things we've learned during this pandemic. I mean, think about this. Two years ago, if you wanted to go to a local walk-in clinic or see a doctor, or you weren't able to do it and you wanted to try to access the system, the primary care system, in a virtual capacity, it was almost impossible to do so. You know, the old saying about necessity being the motherhood of innovation or invention, or whatever the right phrase is here. I think we've seen during this pandemic how we can transition and use technology and be more innovative. And I think that's important in a province that's as physically large as ours is. And that's just one example of how I think we can actually create a way to measure how much access people in this province have to a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a registered nurse, regardless of where they live. And I think that there's no reason for us to not be very ambitious in this regard. And again, when we release our platform on healthcare, this is one of those issues that it's going to touch upon for sure.
And when are you going to release your platform?
Well, right now we're having that conversation. I think that my sincere hope back in November, early December, was that right about now we were going to start to be releasing additional pieces, larger pieces. Obviously, Omicron's disrupted an awful lot in our province and beyond. I think right now we are very much focused on making sure that our economy can reopen in the right way, to make sure that our schools stay open to in-person learning, make sure that we are bringing forward solutions so that the surge we see in hospitals and in nursing homes is actually dealt with in a constructive way. So because we are all focused on dealing with this aspect, this wave of COVID, that's pushed our plans back just a little bit, but I'm impatient to let people know about where we want to take the province. So stay tuned, more is coming soon.
And it will be before the campaign starts.
I promise it'll be before people cast their ballots, if I can put it that way, Martin.
One of the items on that you have given us a preview of, talked about, is the ranked ballot. You mentioned it a couple of times today, so I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about it because it came up in one of the questions. David, in fact, the question was directed at Andrew Horvath, but it arrived a bit late. So I'm going to read it out, what he was going to ask Andrea. I don't know that we know the answer, but it actually raises an important point. So David says, Stephen Del Duca has promised that he will implement ranked balloting when premier or resign, or I think you said not run again. If that is a make or break item for the Liberals, where do you stand on ranked balloting? Now, I don't think Andrew Horvath is a supporter. That's my question to you, is what do you do if you can't get the other parties to agree? Traditionally, in fact, the last time the Liberals undertook some campaign finance reform that I had been writing columns about, and they finally did it, they tried to get the other parties involved. So how do you make this work, given how hard it was at the federal level to get electoral reform in when Justin Trudeau promised it would be the last election on first past the post? He didn't like the proportional representation ideas that other parties wanted. The Conservatives didn't like it either. He landed on ranked ballot as his preference, or that was his express preference. Nobody else was biting, so he dropped it, and he's been vilified ever since. How do you get ahead? How do you succeed with ranked balloting where Justin Trudeau failed?
Well, I think the most important part is to build the support for the idea amongst the electorate, amongst the voters of Ontario, both in the run-up to the election campaign and then during. And there's definitely some work that still needs to be done in that regard. But I'm excited about that challenge. One of the reasons
forgive me for interrupting. We should briefly explain. It's not that it sounds complicated, but it's not. It's basically.
I was just going to go there.
It's an electronic runoff where you can give different choices. But go ahead, sir.
No, I was just going to give a brief explanation. I mean, at the end of the day, I look at this as a fairly straightforward solution to a pretty important problem. The way that we elect provincial politicians, both locally and frankly, even the way that we elect at other levels, it hasn't really substantially changed in a fundamental way for a very long period of time. When we were last in power, we did introduce an option for municipalities to go forward with ranked ballots. The City of London, they had the courage, they had the ambition, they went forward, they made that change. For whatever reasons that I'll never understand, Doug Ford has now taken away that option for all municipalities. That seems like a really bizarre thing, but I think it's fair to say Doug Ford's done a lot of things that I find bizarre over the past 3.5 years. But ranked balloting, to me, it gives people more choice. It empowers voters by giving them a chance to rank their support. So you can choose a first place, a second place, a third place, and so on. It also means that a person doesn't win their local election as an MPP unless they've secured 50% plus one of the votes in their riding. A lot of people don't realize in some ridings in this province, if you locally win 33% or 34%, you end up becoming the MPP. This requires two things. One is you've got to secure at least 50% plus one of the support to take your seat. And secondly, and I say this as someone who has experience in politics and in government, it will force political leaders, their parties, their campaign strategists to actually collaborate, because you're not just competing for first choice, you're competing for voters' second and third choices. And again, I said this earlier in this interview, Martin, I think people are fed up with the usual partisan attacks, the stuff that descends into personal attacks. They don't want that. They want us to figure out how to work together.
Why do you think people want a ranked ballot, though? It doesn't seem like it's the ballot question. That's a phrase we use in politics to mean like what's top
Yeah,
of mind for
yeah.
people, the ballot question. That's what they decide. It's what they're thinking about when they cast their ballot. Is a ranked ballot really that big a deal? Because no one else is talking about electoral reform in Ontario, because the last time we had a referendum on electoral reform,
It was a long
any
time ago.
changes were voted down.
Yeah, look, it's, you know, while it might be true that it doesn't show up sort of top of mind for people who are responding to polls or, you know, or online, because there are a lot of challenges that we're facing. I think one of the important tests of leadership is who is prepared to lead, notwithstanding what we see in polls. Who's prepared to say, look, to diagnose, we got a problem. The way that our democracy works in this province, we have a problem. When so many women and men who serve as MPPs are able to do so without securing 50% plus one of the vote, when we see political parties like, for example, the NDP and the Conservatives, who use ranked ballots to elect their leaders internally, saying that they don't believe that option is good enough for the people of Ontario. In fact, I think at one point, Doug Ford said, I could be wrong about this, but I believe he said the ranked ballot idea for the electorate is too confusing. So it's okay for the Conservative Party, but it's too confusing for the people of Ontario. That just seems really, again, really bizarre to me. So I think it's an important reform. But in addition to my call for ranked ballots, I've also said that isn't the only enhancement or improvement we need in our democracy. It's why I've also committed to appointing a citizens' assembly to study other aspects of how we vote, how we elect people. And I want the other parties to be involved in this conversation. This should not be solely the Ontario Liberal Party pressing forward. These issues are too important for only one party to be talking about them. I want all the partners at the table. I want a citizens' assembly. I'm very open-minded about this stuff because I think that the way that we do it right now is simply not good enough.
Let's save some space for some other issues. Here's one from Sam Risuto. Will the Ontario Liberals work with First Nations on a First Nation specific housing strategy?
Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. I almost never give one-word answers, Martin, as you know, but the answer is yes. It is so important. I've heard it in my travels, whether we're here in the GTA or, you know, around the other parts of the province, that we need to get that right. So the answer is yes. And when we release our housing plan, there will be an element, an important component of that plan that will touch upon housing for Indigenous peoples.
Okay. With such a tragedy in long-term care, thousands of deaths and over 400,000 people receiving home care and wanting alternatives to nursing homes as they age, what is the status of this issue and the priority going to be in your election platform?
Well, I think there's no doubt about the fact that it needs to be a huge component of every party's platform. It should be. We need to have the conversation that we frankly haven't had for far too long in this province. And so I recognize, and this is not a partisan comment, I know this is an issue that's plagued Ontario for a very long period of time. I will say I believe Doug Ford took a tough situation and did make it dramatically worse during the first, second, third, and so on and so forth waves of this pandemic. But here's the story that I'm going to share really quickly. My parents, who don't live too far away from where my wife and I live in Vaughan, my parents are in their 80s now, and they both have a few health issues, but they're doing great and they're living at home. And if I went to visit them tonight and I said, Mom, Dad, if you elect me as premier of this province in June, I'm going to make sure we have a fantastic nursing home available for the two of you. I can assure you that not only would they ask me to leave the house, they'd probably change the locks and not invite me back. And that's my way of saying, though long-term care is a very important part of the conversation about seniors and how we permit, enable, and give them the chance to age gracefully and have dignity and be safe and healthy, it is one part. It is not the whole conversation. There are very few people I've ever met, seniors, who say their first choice is to go into a long-term care home. It doesn't mean we don't have to fix it. We need more spaces. We need better infection prevention and control. We need to pay the people who work in those homes on a consistent, permanent basis, a better and more livable wage. But we also need to invest dramatically more in community-based home care. Not just the money, we also have to make sure that system, which is impossibly difficult to navigate, is easy for people to access. A couple of years ago, when my mom fell, broke her hip, everything worked out at the hospital. She went to rehab. When she came home, it was almost impossible for me, my sister, and my brother to figure out what kind of home care could she access and how would she be able to get it. If we were a family that was dealing with language issues because we were newcomers to the country, or socioeconomic status that made it tougher for us to speak up and speak out, we'd be totally lost. And that should not be the case in a province like ours. So Yes, we've got to have more spaces. Yes, we have to build out long-term care that makes sense, but we also have to have a much bigger conversation about how people like my parents can have the real dignity, ideally living in their community and in their own homes.
Okay, that is a longer conversation, as you say.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time because we have to leave some time for the Green Party leader, Mike Schreiner. Um, we started off by talking about how you've been living your life a little bit on Zoom, and you've talked a lot with the ranked ballot and the talk about the coalition, about the need for parties to cooperate. I have two quick questions. One, why is Doug Ford still leading the polls after 4 years if he's as bad as you say he is and cut back all the programs that you talked about? And secondly, how do you feel about the prospects of actually getting along with the NDP? The Liberals and NDP, I mean, they've been running ads that attack you. They pull out of some of your Zoom press conferences. They've pulled some clips that show you kind of in slow motion, blinking in slow motion, scratching your nose in slow motion. So there's some bad blood between you guys. Can you persuade people, because we're getting a lot of questions about this, that you can actually collaborate and that you can defeat Doug Ford when he's still #1 in the polls?
Well, Martin, I know you've been covering provincial politics here in this province for some time. And, I think you would know from your experience that outside of election campaigns during, let's call them good times, opposition leaders, in particular, brand new opposition leaders, don't get much of an opportunity to be seen or to be heard. Provincial politics is, I mean, it's sad to say, but it's kind of relegated, behind federal politics, which consumes a lot of attention, relatively speaking, and frankly, even local politics, because that's so close to the people. And you think about all the things that municipal politicians have to deal with. Provincial politicians are from time to time lost in the shuffle. Brand new opposition leaders, I think across many, many years and different parties, they struggle to be seen and to be heard in good times. I think during COVID, what we've seen is that most people, while they're open to who's got different viewpoints and ideas, most people really want to hear from heads of government, premiers, prime ministers, mayors, and so on and so forth. And that's understandable because it's been such a struggle that we've all had to endure. I think come the election campaign, I think it's a completely different conversation. I think people are really, really hungry to see who's got the plan, who's got the team, and most importantly, the four-party leaders. I think people want to know, why are we in this? Who are we fighting for? What are we all about? What are we fighting for? And I think, and I'm deeply, I'm really convinced of this. This is not a knock at any one of the other party leaders, although I've already spoken about what I think are Doug Ford's shortcomings that can't really be cured. I am convinced that given the work that we are doing, given the ideas that we're going to have as Ontario Liberals in front of the people of this province, that they will respond positively to the ideas and to the team that we are putting forward. And they'll understand that we're in this fight, that I'm in this fight and we're in this fight for them, and to deliver real progress for them in healthcare, in education, in an economic recovery that doesn't just help the well-connected few, but helps all of us. And in terms of working with the others, look, all I can keep saying is at every turn during this pandemic, I have consistently reached out to all three other parties. I didn't say this earlier when I talked about the summits that I've helped to convene, but I want to make it clear. I invited Doug Ford to those as well. And I talked to Doug Ford directly before the vaccine summit, the vaccine certificate summit. And I said, look, if you can't make it, send one of your ministers, someone else to rep. This is the kind of leadership that I believe people want to see right now in particular, because what we've had to endure. I'd be delighted if at the end of the day, we are all working focused on delivering that kind of progress, healthcare, education, the environment, the economy. If we're focused on the same goals, it would be the honor of a lifetime for me to have the chance to work with anyone else who shares my passion for progress, regardless of their partisan stripe. Again, saying that, recognizing, I just don't think Doug is the right person for the job. And I think that will become crystal clear by June 2nd.
All right. On that note, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much, Mr. Del Duca, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And see you on the campaign trail.
Thanks, Martin. Take care.
We're going to switch now to our third and final segment with the leader of Ontario's Green Party. Mike Schreiner won the leadership of the party in 2009, the same year that Andrea Horvath took over the NDP. And after almost a decade of watching from the outside, he won election as the party's first MPP in 2018, representing Guelph. Prior to politics, he ran his own local food company. He has an MA in history from Indiana University and degrees in history and business administration from the University of Kansas. Mr. Schreiner, welcome back.
Hey, Martin, it's a pleasure to be back and a real honor to join you, and just deeply grateful that I can join you from my living room here in Guelph on the Treaty 3 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation.
Well, this is your third appearance at our Democracy Forum, and so I'm sorry we kept you waiting. We had Annemie Paul here last year, and your former federal counterparts. We had a lot of green over the years. Let's start with the same questions that are top of mind for our audience and that I put to our earlier guests. And it's the same question that I asked you a year ago, because you do have a seat in the legislature. You're on track to be reelected, I think. And so if there's a minority government, your seat will count if you still have it. So if Doug Ford loses his majority, which is the current projections, would you support him, or how would you vote in a non-confidence vote in the legislature? Would you vote to support a Tory government or defeat it?
Yeah, I just can't support Doug Ford as premier. I've never seen a premier so systematically dismantle environmental protections, completely take us backwards on climate action, and just be missing in action when it comes on so many important issues like housing affordability, shoring up our healthcare system, and addressing the mental health crisis that we're facing in the province. So no, I wouldn't be able to support Mr. Ford.
Okay, so what would you do if there is a pitch for an alternative government? Do you see the possibility of working with the other parties? I mean, federally, the Greens and the NDP snipe at each other a lot, and there was even some bad blood with the federal Greens and federal Liberals. Could you actually get along with your provincial rivals here?
You know, Martin, I think I've earned a reputation at Queen's Park as probably the person who is most effective at collaborating across party lines. So I absolutely always put people first ahead of partisan politics. I think that's what the people of Ontario want. You know, I'm proud to say I was the instigator of the first bill in Ontario history that all four political parties supported and passed the legislature. So absolutely, I'm available to collaborate and cooperate, and will do that to fight for the issues that people care about.
Okay, well, it's my job to hold you to account and be the truth teller of sorts, and I will actually confirm that you have, from what I have seen at Queen's Park, tried very hard to work with the various parties. Maybe because you're a party of one, but I have seen you on electoral reform and other things talk to the Liberals, the Tories, and you Democrats. So here's my question to you. Could you see them getting along? Can you see the Liberals and you Democrats cooperating on a coalition government with a Green party on the side, inside, one expects? How would that work?
Yeah, you know what? I think at the end of the day, the people of Ontario are going to decide what Parliament's going to look like, which parties are going to have how many seats, and then negotiations around what kind of government will be formed will take place. And I think under those conditions, politicians will be compelled to honor what Ontarians have voted for. And in a minority situation, we will be forced to work together. And I think that's a good thing. I think we need more collaboration and less hyperpartisanship in politics. And so I think that'll be to the benefit of the province. And I think we will figure out a way to work together.
Okay. Look, I don't want to give you too easy a ride today, but I am going to read out a tweet that was tweeted at me the other day, I think from a Green person, a Green candidate. But he said, quote, better if Ontario NDP, if the Ontario NDP and the Ontario Liberals collaborate before the next election and recruit Mike Schreiner to be the leader so we can have a fighting chance of booting out Ford Nation, unquote. Any comment on that? Would you be prepared to resign your position as head of the Greens and forge a coalition pre-election? Okay, you don't have to answer that. All right, let's talk about the environment, actually. You saw the Ford government come in, the Progressive Conservatives dismantle the cap and trade program that was brought in by the previous Liberal government, which you supported, broadly supported, I think. Wasn't your first choice, but you broadly supported it. You saw them dismantle a lot of other programs, the beginnings of a pharmacare program for young people and old folks, a pilot program for a minimum income, which I think Greens are supportive of. And yet here we are 4 years later, just before the election, just a few weeks before the election, and Mr. Ford's party, despite his personal numbers, lack of popularity, declining popularity, his party is still #1 in the polls. How did that happen?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of volatility in polls, and polls are a snapshot of what people thought yesterday, not what they're going to think tomorrow, not what they're going to think on June 2nd. So, there's 127 days until the provincial election. A lot can change in politics in 127 days. And even when the premier is leading in the polls, it only represents about 30% of the voters, depending on which poll you're looking at. So campaigns matter. And I'm really excited to have the opportunity to share our vision about the kind of Ontario that we can help people build, that we can have a green and caring recovery coming out of COVID. And I think that's going to motivate and engage voters to take a look at the Green Party. And we're very confident going into the election.
Okay, one of the questions that you are expert on is the environment, but from talking to you and your federal counterpart, you don't pretend to be just a single issue party. You want to talk. You want to be a party that's expert on a lot of issues. So here's one specifically for you from Alex Bishop. The single greatest issue during COVID that everyone agrees on is the need for our province to do more in mental health. What is your approach to transforming mental health care in this province?
Yeah, I'm very excited that we'll be soon releasing a comprehensive mental health and addiction strategy. And we've been putting pressure on the government to make the investments we need right now to reduce wait times and ensure equitable, universal access to mental health services in this province. When I think of children, the wait times for children to access mental health services, 18 months on average, sometimes longer than 2 years. That's completely unacceptable. That's why we've been calling on the government for an immediate $150 million a year additional injection of funding into mental health services. The Canadian Children's Mental Health Ontario says would reduce wait times for children to access mental health services to 30 days. Those are the kinds of investments we're going to need to address the mental health crisis, ensure that people have access to mental health, because mental health is health and needs to be equitably accessible, just like physical health is.
Okay, let's give you an environment question from Daniel. With the UN warning about global warming, the world seems to be on fire, almost literally. So what is your plan to help with the climate crisis while taking into account the fact that the people of Ontario have had their funds stretched unbelievably since COVID has hit us?
Yeah, I'm really proud of the climate action plan the Ontario Greens released just prior to the climate negotiations in Glasgow that shows an evidence, science-based way that we can cut climate pollution in half by 2030 and be net zero by 2045 using existing technology and doing it in a way that makes life less affordable for people. Let's reduce transportation emissions by, one, electrifying everything, but two, let's build communities that are livable and affordable, where people don't have to commute 2 hours just to find an affordable place to call home. That's why I'm opposed to Doug Ford's mega highway projects that would pave over farmland and force people into unaffordable lifestyles, commuting long distances. Let's help people save money by saving energy and reducing their utility bills through a green retrofit program that would create hundreds of thousands of jobs in communities across the province. Let's make Ontario the global leader in the fastest growing sectors of the global economy, which is clean tech, electric vehicles, renewable energy, battery storage, water purification. Let's make Ontario farmers the leader in bioproduct manufacturing. We have so many opportunities in this province to address the climate crisis and have a strong economic recovery.
Okay. Here's a question from David. It's often said by party leaders that the goal of each election is to become premier. I don't hear you saying that, but that feels overly ambitious for the Green Party in the next election. What result, number of MPPs, would make you happy coming out of the next election? And if there's one policy you want to see implemented by the next government, what is it?
Well, first of all, Martin, I don't think I'd be any worse than our existing premier. And I would say I'm ready to be premier and that I can provide the leadership to build the kind of Ontario people want. But I also deeply believe in being honest with people. I think that's one of my signatures as a politician, to always be straight with people. And I recognize that we're likely not going to go from one seat to forming government. But I can tell you, we've shown what one seat, what a huge difference even one Green MPP can make. And that's exactly why I want to see additional Green MPPs. Let's have a handful of Green MPPs exerting the kind of influence to build the kind of Ontario that people want. We've seen that with the Green Party in British Columbia, PEI in New Brunswick, and we can do it right here in Ontario, and we can do it in a way that enables us to address the climate crisis and the housing affordability crisis in a way that cuts climate pollution and makes life more affordable for people and grows our economy.
Okay, here's a question from Ethan Saburin. Would you support the NDP's Green New Democratic deal as a climate plan?
Well, you know what? It's certainly a step in the right direction, but I think the science is telling us that half measures and partial solutions simply aren't enough. Like, we're running out of time. So I would encourage the NDP and the Liberals and the Conservatives, all the other parties, to step up your ambition. Let's cut climate pollution. Let's crush it. Let's cut it in half by 2030. Let's be net zero by 2045, so we can position Ontario to be the global leader in the fastest growing sectors of the global economy, which is the clean tech sectors. We can do it. We have the people, we have the resources, we have the financial capacity to do it. And that's exactly why we've put forward such an ambitious yet doable plan. And I invite others to join us in implementing that plan.
Let's just shift gears for half a second. You heard Mr. Del Duca talk a few times about his plan for a ranked ballot. I believe the Green Party, for understandable reasons, has always been in favor of proportional representation. But you say you're a straight shooter. Tell us how this would play out. There's not going to be a proportional representation move in Ontario in the next few years. Where's Mr. Del Duca's ranked ballot proposal going to end up? If he is at the head of a minority government, does it have legs, or is it dead in the water?
You know what? Mr. Del Duca, unfortunately, has everything backwards. He says he's going to unilaterally bring in ranked ballots and then hold a citizens' assembly. I think our electoral system needs cross-party collaboration when we talk about the reforms that are required. So let's bring in a citizens' assembly, and let's talk about what the people of Ontario want as the best way to reform our voting system so it works for the people of Ontario. You know, almost every, electoral reform, democracy advocate I know do not really support Mr. Del Duca's ranked ballots proposal. So you know what, instead of doing that unilaterally, let's do the Citizens Assembly and let's engage people in this province to imagine the kind of electoral system that's going to benefit them the most.
Okay, we went through that. We've seen that movie before with a constituent assembly and a referendum, and it didn't work. But be that as it may, here's a question from Carrie Glynns Elliott. No one seems to want to talk about private cars as a major cause of climate change. Will the Greens propose a plan to reduce purchase and use of gas-guzzling private vehicles like SUVs?
Yeah, the Green Party has one. We have to make sure we have more transportation options for people, which is exactly why we're aggressively investing in expansion of public transportation, rail, buses, etc., but especially electrified buses, because that's the fastest way we can create alternatives for people. Secondly, we need to build communities where people can walk and cycle and be able to access the things they need in their neighborhoods and to support the local businesses they want. And when it comes to people's personal vehicles, we need to electrify personal transportation. And the way we would do it is through a fee-based program that would say, hey, you know what? We're going to put a price on those gas guzzlers, and we're going to use that money to provide people with a rebate, $10,000 for an electric vehicle, so they can electrify their personal transportation. But the bottom line is, if we want to make life more affordable for people, let's give people lots of other options to owning a personal vehicle to be able to get around, especially in urban areas. I recognize in our rural communities, that's oftentimes not an option, which is why we need to make sure we have all forms of electrified personal transportation, pickup trucks, SUVs, and cars.
Okay. I have given you a representative sample of the questions that we've been getting from people. There's only one more theme that's coming up in our questions, and so I'm going to give you a taste of that. The first one is anonymous, and then the second one has a name attached to it. First one is, what do you say to those who lost trust in the Green Party because of what happened before, during, and after the last federal election? And another question, also anonymous, I thought there'd be a name. There was a lot of turmoil within the Green Party over the past year. How does that turmoil impact the Green Party of Ontario in the next election? And also, have you been in contact with Ms. Paul about potentially running with the Green Party of Ontario in the next election?
Well, first of all, I said I'm a straight shooter. Yeah, there's no doubt. There was a lot of turmoil within the federal party over the last year. But I want to be very clear with people. The Ontario Greens are a separate party with a different organizational culture and governance structure. And while the federal party was going through its turmoil, we set a record, the most fundraising we've ever had in a year in our party's history. We have more volunteers than we ever have. We have the largest staff the party has ever had. We're doing an amazing job of recruiting a diverse group of top-notch candidates. So the provincial party is in a very strong position, and I'm very excited about the vision and the values and the message we can bring to the people of Ontario in the next election. I've made no, I haven't, I've always been very clear that I felt the federal party should have stood behind Annamie Paul as the democratically elected leader of their party through the federal election, and then have a discussion about the future of the party's leadership after that. And it was fortunate that she was able to lead the party through the election, because I thought she won the leaders' debate. I think most people agree on that. It's unfortunate that she wasn't able to capitalize that successful debate into winning her own seat. But my goodness, we did win a seat in Kitchener Centre with Mike Morris, and Annamie Paul played an important role in helping him get over the top and win that seat.
Would you consider asking her to join the party provincially?
Oh, yeah, no, I have been texting. Annamie and I are still in conversation, and she's made it very clear to me that she needs some time to rest, relax, and be away from politics for a while.
Decompress, I would think. Sure. Okay, but let's follow up on that. You make some good points, but I can't help noticing that you've been at this for nearly 14 years as party leader, and it took you a decade to finally win your seat in 2018, and you've got a powerful tag team. You have a deputy leader, Diane Sachs, who's a former environmental commissioner of Ontario. I know you say you don't love opinion polls, but last time I looked, which was this morning, you were actually holding on to some of your core vote. You're at 5% plus or minus, a lot more than the federal party is scoring. So you had so much going for you in Ontario a year or so ago, including the positive publicity when Annamie Paul was first elected. And then everything kind of imploded. And I hear that you're a separate organization, more or less, but you're part of the same tribe and you're part of the same brand nationally and globally, the Greens, never mind how the organization works. So the publicity, you're the straight shooter, you'll admit the publicity does not help your party provincially. So how do you overcome that?
Well, we overcome it in the way that we are overcoming it right now, working really hard at Queen's Park and making a difference in people's lives, leading the fight to oppose Highway 413, which would supercharge sprawl and climate emissions, leading the charge to, prevent Ford from building an Amazon warehouse on provincially significant wetlands, leading the charge on the housing affordability crisis. I mean, Martin, it was your paper who called our plan a masterclass plan in addressing the housing affordability crisis, putting forward Ontario's first science evidence-based climate action plan that shows how we can crush climate pollution, cutting it in half by 2030, being net zero by 2045, utilizing existing technology. It's about putting forward the real solutions to the real challenges the people of Ontario are facing. It's about bringing fresh, new ideas to old problems that the status quo parties have failed to solve. And a handful of Green MPPs can make the difference to build the Ontario that you want and provide the leadership that this province needs. And with your help, we can have that influence at Queen's Park.
Okay, but how do you avoid having the same kind of civil war that afflicted the federal Green Party, where it was spending all that time talking about conflict in the Middle East instead of the challenges in Canada? How do you inoculate yourself against that kind of atomization?
You know what? I think it's clear the Ontario Greens are united. We're strong. We want to be raising record fundraising numbers. If people didn't like the vision we're putting forward, didn't appreciate and think the hard work we're doing at Queen's Park wasn't making a difference in their lives, we wouldn't have the largest staff in the party's history if we weren't in a strong position going into the next election. And so, sometimes adversity can make you stronger. And some of the adversity that the party went through at the federal level, we can learn from that at the provincial level. And I think it's made us stronger. And I think it'll make us more effective moving forward.
What's the lesson learned?
I think one of the lessons learned is that we have to stare issues like systemic racism in the face and acknowledge that it exists in all parts of our society, including in every political party and including the Green Party. We have to recognize that that we have to address issues around systemic discrimination and make sure we support people. And one of the things the Ontario Greens have done is we have a special fund that is dedicated to supporting equity deserving candidates, because we know that not only do we need to nominate and run more diverse candidates, but we also need to make sure we fund those campaigns. So it's providing those kinds of supports. And you know what? Those can be challenging conversations. Those can be challenging actions to implement, but they're going to make us better. They're going to make us stronger, and they're going to make us a more effective party in the province.
Okay. Mr. Schreiner, we're into overtime and we're out of time. So I want to thank you for joining us, and we hope to have you back again. Safe travels on the campaign trail, and thanks for being with us today.
It's a pleasure, Martin, and appreciate everyone who's joined us today. Engaging in democracy, regardless of which party you support, is vitally important. So thank you all for being here today.
All right. Look, a final word of thanks as Mr. Schreiner leaves us, a final word of thanks to everyone who joined us today. I'll be writing about this in my next column in Thursday's Toronto Star, so stay tuned and stay connected to the democratic process. The election is coming up on June the 2nd. I think the pre-election campaign is now underway, so I hope you'll follow it closely, and don't forget to vote. A special thanks to the Dean of Arts, Pam Sugerman, for sponsoring today's event, and also the Manager of Media Strategy, Rhiannon and John, for helping me to organize today's event. Stay tuned for future democracy forums, and stay safe.